Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Renewable Natural Gas as the Leading Transportation Fuel in North America. Um, could you please confirm that you can hear me well? Just before we start, I want to make sure that everybody can hear me well. If you can just write in the chat function, that would be great. Wonderful. Thank you very, very much. Okay, that sounds great. Thank you all for joining and welcome once again. So we are doing this webinar in partnership with BP, AMP Americas, California Bioenergy, the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas, and California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition. My name is Diana Droppel. I will be the webinar host this morning. And yeah, so before we start, I'd like to tell you just a few words about my organization, New Energy Update by Reuters Events, and why we are doing this webinar at this specific time. So, as mentioned, New Energy Update is part of Reuters Events. We help renewable energy executives try to anticipate the future as much as possible, try to formulate effective plans in the face of change. And of course, we sometimes are more difficult than others. We are, of course, very, very challenged by this period right now. So we have to identify, continuous avenues. So generally, we try to figure out how to do this through independent market research. We put up a lot of webinars, generally speaking, international conferences, now most recently, virtual events given the current climate. So specifically in the biogas and in the RNG space, or renewable natural gas space, we deliver content that will hopefully provide you with valuable information, which you can then use to stay ahead of these changes, changes that have a direct impact on biogas and RNG production, and of course their utilization cycle, right? So now in this particularly challenging time for everyone, we thought it would be a good idea to put together a webinar where we will focus on exploring challenges, exploring opportunities associated with the utilization of renewable natural gas, specifically in the vehicle fuel market. So keep in mind, we're always looking for collaborators, so feel free to reach out to me if after the webinar if you'd like to start a conversation. And just before I introduce you to our lovely panelists, I just wanted to give you a little bit more context for those who are just joining in now. So the highest value for renewable natural gas is in the vehicle market, vehicle fuel market. So for you to truly monetize the environmental attributes of your renewable natural gas production, and try to utilize it as efficiently as possible, you of course need to overcome the challenges that will move the market forward. So there are a lot of ways to do this. This webinar will explain, and we are very, very excited to partner with our wonderful panelists. So I'll start with Andy Dvorak, Vice President of Business Development for AMP Americas, Harrison Clay, Vice President of Strategic Development and Global Environmental Products at BP, Thomas Lawson, President of the California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition, Johannes Escudero, CEO and Executive Director of the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas, and Neil Black, who is the President of California Bioenergy, also known as CalBio. So we are very, very excited to have them as part of our speaker lineup in this webinar, which will be shaped as a live Q&A. Great. So remember that you can send in your questions at any time. This is going to be shaped, as I said, as a live Q&A, so your questions are welcome. And if you have any technical issues, just drop me a message directly, the organizer on the platform. The recordings for this webinar will be emailed to you, so it's all good if you cannot stay for the whole 60 minutes. And yeah, I'd like to thank everybody in advance. I hope you enjoy this, and I will now ask the panelists to quickly introduce themselves before we start the live Q&A. In the meantime, start sending in your questions. Um, so I will start with Andy Dvorak. Please, if you want to introduce yourself to the audience, that would be great.
Thanks, Diana. I appreciate you inviting us for the discussion and for participating with a great panel. As Diana said, my name is Andy Dvorak. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for AMP Americas. AMP Americas has been around since about 2011. We're most known for the development of the first dairy to renewable natural gas project in the United States in the Fair Oaks facilities. We've since raised additional capital and invested in a number of other projects. We have a few vertical integrated parts of our business that we manage. The first is we invest, own, and operate renewable natural gas projects with particular focus on the dairy facility. We also market gas for third-party projects, and we operate projects for ourselves as well as for third-party. So we're very interested in looking for new projects. If there's any inquiries about that, we'll definitely be interested in exploring those. Happy to answer any questions today, and we look forward to the discussions going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Andy. That's great. Our next panelist that I'd like to introduce is Harrison Clay from BP. Harrison, if you want to tell us a couple of words.
Sure. Thanks everybody for being here, and thanks Diana for putting this together in these challenging times, giving us an opportunity to all get together and talk about how this is affecting the industry. I've been in the biogas business about 10 years now. I was the president of Clean Energy Renewable Fuels, wholly owned subsidiary of Clean Energy. Started in about 2010, and we built biogas plants and sold biogas as a vehicle fuel through Clean Energy and their vehicle fuel stations. And that business, the production and distribution business, was bought by BP in 2017, and I joined the global environmental products team at BP, focusing on biogas. We continue to buy biogas from all ranges of producers. We sell most of it as a vehicle fuel, but we do sell biogas into other markets as well, and see a lot of new and emerging opportunities in other markets. But the focus has and continues to be on transportation fuel. We're continuing to build biogas plants through a joint venture we have with RNG, and we'll be bringing actually our fourth plant online in June, which is exciting, at a landfill in Tennessee. And I look forward to the conversation today, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has that I can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Harrison. Now we'll move on to our next panelist, Neil Black from CalBio. Neil, if you want to say hello to everyone.
Good morning, and Diana, thank you for inviting us on, and deeply appreciate the opportunity. CalBio has been in business since 2006, and we have focused on dairy digester projects in California. We created the company first to reduce greenhouse gas impacts of dairy methane, and second, then to use the methane beneficially and create a new revenue stream for our family dairy partners. We began with electricity projects and benefited from a partnership with Caterpillar, utilizing California's biomass feed-in tariff. And we changed our focus to vehicle fuels a few years ago. And we're now developing over 60 digester projects in 7 clusters of dairies in the Central Valley of California. There's one central interconnection point, one renewable natural gas interconnection point. In addition to that interconnection point, there's one central facility. And all the renewable natural gas is compressed for vehicle fuel use. The first 2 clusters will be coming online this summer. And in addition to that, we're also developing a couple of fuel cell projects with Bloom Energy. And that electricity will also be used to power vehicles. And in the course of building CalBio, we also have developed a focus on improving local air quality, in addition to working on greenhouse gas reductions. Thank you.
Great. That's really good. Thank you so much, Neil. Our next panelist, who I will introduce, is Johannes Escudero from the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas. Hi, Johannes. I'm gonna quickly send a notification. As I understand it, in your introduction, you want to show us a few slides, right?
Sure. Thank you, Diana.
Wonderful.
There we go. Can everyone see the first slide there?
Yes, we can see it. It's up on there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Diana, for the invitation, for the opportunity to continue our collaboration. And good morning, everyone from the West Coast, where we're currently sheltered in place, working remotely. Look forward to our dialogue and providing any insight in response to questions that our participants might have today. As Diana mentioned earlier, my name is Johannes Escudero, and I have the pleasure of serving as the CEO and Executive Director of the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas, which we founded in July of 2011. So we're coming up on our 9-year anniversary, and our mission remains, and as an organization, together with our 232 member companies, we advocate for the sustainable development, deployment, and utilization of renewable natural gas so that present and future generations have access to domestic renewable clean fuel and energy. We don't do that alone. We have 15 members of staff who work full-time with us here at the Coalition to advance our mission on a daily basis, including during this shelter-in-place pandemic season, taking advantage of technology and digital platforms and accessing relationships that we maintain at the federal, state, provincial levels with lawmakers and regulators to advance our mission through policy advocacy and education. Much of that activity, which is filtered through our 9 different advisory boards. I won't run through all of those here. I'll just flash those on the screen. We represent, as I mentioned, 232 member companies today. That encompasses leading operators in the waste collection, waste management, recycling space, developers, consultants, engineers, banks, investors, other financiers, law firms, organized labor, manufacturers, technology and service providers, marketers, transporters, fleets, fueling stations, airport cities, counties, municipalities, nonprofits, utilities, and universities, whom together are responsible for producing more than 98% of all the renewable natural gas supply in North America. There's a snapshot of our directors, my contact information, and I think what will inform much of our perspective today, at least from the RNG Coalition, is informed by our philosophy, which is at the end of the day, advocacy and education are what influence public policies. Public policies, for better or worse, influence markets. Markets drive demand. Demand determines value, and the nexus between that value and revenue generated from either the product or the service ultimately impact the bottom line, the sustainability, and the ability of our industry stakeholders to remain solvent. So at the end of the day, it all points back to public policy, and that's why we exist. So look forward to sharing our perspective and experience and answering any questions today.
Wonderful. That's very helpful. Thank you very much, Johannes. And our last panelist that I would like to introduce is Thomas Lawson from the California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition. So Thomas, if you want to say hello to everyone, that would be great.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be a part of this wonderful panel. Every one of them I've known as colleagues. April was my 4th year in this business and is in charge of the California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition. So to introduce myself, my name is Thomas Lawson. I'm the president of the California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition. We are the California statewide association that deals with natural gas vehicles. We represent the natural gas vehicle industry, which includes major automobile manufacturers, utilities, heavy-duty engine manufacturers, fueling station providers, equipment manufacturers, and also fleet users of natural gas vehicles. We are at the cross section of policy and regulatory activities in California as it relates to renewable natural gas in the vehicle space. And we try to provide a proactive presence on legislation and regulatory activities, workshops, regulatory decisions being made that either benefit the industry or do harm to the industry. So we are proactive in protecting and moving the industry forward. Looking forward to the discussion today and hearing your questions. The renewable natural gas industry before COVID-19 has been under some attack and has faced some hurdles. But I think that we have a great product. We have a great story to tell, and looking forward to working with all of you to tell that story in 2020 and beyond. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Thomas. And thank you to all of you. I'm very, very excited, as I said at the beginning, to partner with our excellent speaker lineup for this webinar. And now that we are all introduced, we should probably start with the Q&A discussion. So we already have some really interesting questions coming here from our audience. I can see that you guys are being really active and proactive, which is great. Thank you so much for that. I will actually start with a question that I saw popping on the screen, which I believe is for all of you guys, all of our panelists. And it's actually very useful that you have a sort of different role in the value chain, so perhaps a different perspective on how things are going. So the question is, what do you view as the primary obstacles to financing or developing RNG projects today? And how can the capital markets get more comfortable with the underlying value proposition? So if you would like to start in any order you please, whoever wants to go first can go first.
This is Neil Black. I'll begin with that. And we have benefited from a remarkable public-private partnership in the state of California, where we have benefited from grant funding from the California Department of Food and Agriculture, the Public Utility Commission, and the Air Resources Board. And then we have brought in private capital, and we have very important equity providers of both Chevron and our dairy farm partners. And so it's kind of a wonderful balance of one of the world's largest oil and gas companies and family farms investing in these projects. And then we also have very important debt relationships that we have been developing over many years, and initially began with funding that SoCalGas provided from the Aliso Canyon Mitigation Fund that is provided in coordination with the state of California. That really helped get our project focus on natural gas being used for vehicle fuel from our projects off the ground. And going forward, a very, very important part of the equation will be the long-term stability of California's low-carbon fuel standard and the experience and proof of the projects that are in development.
That's right. Thank you, Neil. That's indeed very, very, very helpful. Would anybody else like to reply to this question?
This is Andy from AMP Americas. I can throw a couple things out, which I think some of my colleagues would probably agree with. One of the biggest driving forces in our business is the demand for our fuel in the markets that we serve. And currently, the largest, most attractive market based on carbon intensity is the California market. And we continue to push and work with local entities to try to drive demand growth. The industry is growing significantly as far as gas production, while the demand for vehicles or demand for fuel in the California market is not growing necessarily as fast, but we're always working to try to push that up. So that would be one of the first things I think is a big driving force. The second is going to be risk appetite. Our projects are predicated on revenue streams that are dictated by the Low Carbon Fuel Standard program as well as the Renewable Fuel Standard through the EPA. The Low Carbon Fuel Standard program has some longevity to it as far as policy initiatives which are driving supply and demand, whereas in the renewable fuels space, we have slightly less longevity just on uncertainty of renewal, and also the year-over-year adjustments of RVOs and ability to adjust supply and demand based on moving those RVOs around. So those are the biggest driving forces that I see that dictate financing and the viability of these projects.
Yeah, this is Harrison. I would add to that I think, the lack of long-term fixed pricing in the RNG market and for the attributes that are generated from selling RNG as a vehicle fuel is always a challenge in getting funding. And part of that is that the traditional capital sources for energy infrastructure projects, they come to these projects with models and expectations and return assumptions that they have developed, many of them in other renewables markets like solar or wind, where they do get these long-term PPAs, and they're used to seeing low cost debt or ability to lever these projects, and that's not possible in the traditional format with most of these projects because you simply can't get a forward price that's 7 to 10 years fixed. It's a very, very challenging thing to do given all of the uncertainty around the LCFS and RVO or RFS programs. So then you can give up a lot more return. There are capital sources that will come in and look at these projects and ask for a higher return to quicker return to capital to compensate them for the increased risk or the inability to put that low cost capital or leverage onto the project. But then you start to squeeze developer returns and start to become less interesting to the developer to take the risk and put their money and sweat equity into developing the project. So that continues to be a real challenge. It often funding these projects and finding the right structure for the offtake often feels like threading a needle. And it doesn't make it any easier when the LCFS market, as Andy pointed out, in California, the RNG market to which you can generate LCFS credits is growing at a much slower rate than the available supply and the carbon intensity improvements of the RNG supply. So the demand, when demand for RNG as a vehicle fuel is not growing as fast as the supply and the carbon intensity of the supply, more of the margin of the producer margin has to be shared. To get more vehicles on the road, more of that credit value has to be shared with the actual vehicle owner to incentivize them to buy the trucks and use the fuel. And of course, that squeezes the producer as well. So I think those are really the things that I see as the biggest challenges to getting these things funded and built.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Harrison and Andy. Would anybody else like to add to this, or should we move on to the next question? We do have plenty of them, so it's as you wish. Okay.
Go ahead. Perfect. I think anything we add would be anecdotal, so let's carry on. Go ahead.
No, sure. If you want to make any comments, then you can, of course.
No, I think well said by Neil, Andy, and Harrison, who really represent the developers and marketers on this panel. So well done, gentlemen.
Great. Thank you all. Here is another interesting question. So prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the value of D3 RINs was showing some strong signs of recovery from the lows of 2019. Would you be able to give any insight as to what was driving this recovery and why a similar recovery was not seen in other RIN types? Would anybody like to start?
Well, I think one thing I mean, it's speculation, obviously, but I do think that one one driver for you might imagine one driver for improved D3 RIN prices, especially relative to the other categories, would be that the drop in the price of oil would lead to an assumed higher price for the cellulosic waiver credit in 2021, which would mean that typically that cellulosic waiver credit value is going to be a driver for the D3 RIN price. So that could be part of the explanation, I think.
Yes, very, very good. Thank you for that. Andy, and while was that Andy or Harrison? Sorry, I might have
That was
confused.
Harrison. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, you do have very, very similar voices. What do you actually what could you tell us about generally the impact of the current sort of COVID crisis on demand, or if you perhaps want to refer to some of the more specific challenges that you've seen in certain projects, perhaps that have been not getting completed as expected before. Is there anything that you could share regarding that?
Are you asking me specifically?
Yeah. That.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's there are projects that are losing their funding. Some of the entities that have been more active in funding projects are definitely putting things on hold and reassessing their investment thesis in the space. I think that there are, and depending on where you are, there can be issues around work stoppages and ensuring you have safe working conditions if you're in construction or development. So I think that's also something that we've seen both on our own projects and third-party projects. Is even in some cases where you're allowed legally to continue the projects because they're energy or essential service related, obviously there's the fundamental question is, do you feel like it's a safe environment for the crew? If you have a large crew on site, what precautions do you need to take and ensuring that you've done that. So I think those kinds of things are certainly impacting projects. Permitting agencies may be having slowdowns or work disruptions as well. Supply chain issues are affecting manufacturers of gas conditioning equipment, especially the global supply chain. If you've got parts coming from India and China and other places, there's been, I know, some issues there. And global shipping has been very uncertain for manufacturers. Obtaining shipping of products, timeline to get things shipped, all of that is having to be reassessed and is creating challenges.
Great. Thank you very much, Harrison. What about the other panelists? What do you guys think about the long-term implication on RNG markets given the current situation?
This is Johannes, Diane. I'll just add that year to date 2020, we have had a few projects stall, but candidly, the handful of projects in that category really petered out as a result of a dip in the RIN value, both for D3 and D5, and predated the pandemic, at least the impact of the pandemic in North America, to the extent that as energy and essential service providers, I completely agree with the delays our industry is realizing that Harrison articulated, but we still have 37 renewable natural gas projects that are under construction today. There's 36 in the U.S. and one in Canada. But in addition to that, we have 62 RNG projects that are still moving forward in their respective development phases. There's 51 in the U.S. and 11 in Canada within the purview of our membership that we're aware of. So still moving forward, which is encouraging. Some of that's reflected by the fact that our organization is continuing to grow in terms of members, in terms of projects, in terms of volumes produced during the season. And we don't take full credit for that, obviously, but trying to take advantage of the fact that people on average are spending up to 180% more time online And so while our physical access may be somewhat limited, we're trying to take advantage of available technology and digital platforms to educate the general public about the environmental and economic benefits associated with increased and sustainable development of renewable natural gas, given the important role that methane mitigation, carbon sequestration play in terms of a climate change conversation, which I think everyone is realizing, especially during the season of shelter in place, reduced vehicle miles traveled, air quality is improving. You can, in Southern California, in Los Angeles County, you see further than you have been able to for years. All that's encouraging. It's not coincidental, and our industry has a unique nexus there, and that, again, we're not just motivated by number of projects, although that's a metric. We're not only inspired to increase volumes of RNG produced, although that's certainly an objective, but our industry really stands ready as part of a global climate change solution, given the sustainability role we play of taking society's waste streams and repurposing them for productive end use. Obviously, we're focusing on transportation fuel today, and certainly since 2015, programs at the federal level, like the Renewable Fuel Standard, and state programs like California's Low Carbon Fuel Standard, Oregon's Clean Fuels Program, have driven RNG production and demand, but certainly those aren't the only markets. And we feel our responsibility as an organization is to, through effective policy advocacy and education, create as many market opportunities and alternatives for our industry as possible, so that project development can continue to grow, so that we can continue to capture and control as much methane as possible and make as big a contribution to climate change as we can.
That's great. Thank you very much for the positivity and the very realistic, actually, views on this. So that's great. Would anybody else like to add anything to that, or perhaps should we jump to the next question? Yeah, I heard a little voice.
This is Neil, and I
Hi,
just
Neil.
could give an example as a developer that really builds off what the two prior speakers just said, and that is, we continue to move forward with our projects and feel very fortunate relative to others in the economy that we're able to. And though we are moving forward with our projects and we anticipate 2 clusters to come online this summer, we have been slowed down. For instance, we work very closely with the local electrical utility, and they were delayed because of COVID-19, but we're working together to get the power to the site that we need for our projects. Our lenders have been slowed down with the focus on PPP and other issues, but remain very supportive of our projects because we provide a supplemental revenue stream to the dairies that they often also provide debt to. So they view that as a very positive part of the long-term program for the ag industry. And a few of our manufacturers have been impacted and slowed down, but those have been more the exception than the rules. And our dairies, of course, have had their revenues slashed with the fall of milk prices, but people are looking longer term and the importance of projects like this of helping them meet their sustainability goals and provide a supplemental revenue stream.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Neil. And actually, there was, I think, a question in relation to sustainability goals. I saw it earlier on. Give me one. There was a very, very interesting question that I saw, so I'm just trying to.
Thomas,
Right.
can I
Sure,
share?
sure, absolutely.
Great.
Please
I
go ahead.
wanted to piggyback on some of the most recent themes of the comments from the panelists. The industry, I think, has done a great job of getting into the details and the opportunities and into the various ways that you can finance these projects and get caught up on what's happening with RINs and the prices. And I think that is appropriate. And the folks on the other panelists on this are very well versed in that. One of the things I think that we need to transition into as an industry, and this will probably be the theme of my comments today, is what else are we doing as an industry to create that environment to support and really ensure that renewable natural gas is part of not just California, but the nation's long-term clean energy goals and solutions. And some of that is going to be thinking outside the box. How integrated are we with our marketing and our communications teams to talk about not just the projects, but the benefits that they provide from a sustainability standpoint, letting the public know what they're getting from these projects being developed from a clean air standpoint, from a reduction in pollutants in the environment, and some of those real basic kind of things that the average person probably doesn't understand what that digester is doing for them and for their community. And so I think that that's something that we have to pivot to. I would say, based on what I've experienced, we haven't kept up in that regard, and that's something that we need to bolster.
That's really, really good. Thank you very much for your comments, Thomas. Could
Diana, this is Neil. Could I just add
Yes,
a
of
couple
course.
quick things to that?
Yes, of course.
And just, we think of everything in terms of cows and numbers and metrics in terms of cows. And California, of course, is the focus of so many of the projects across the country because of the low carbon fuel standard. And California has basically the worst air quality in the country, both in the LA basin and also similarly in the San Joaquin Valley. So the local pollution improvements that the panelists are talking to, and it was just thoughtfully described, are really significant. These new natural gas trucks reduce pollution by 90% relative to diesel. And as I said, we think of everything in terms of cows. So basically, one milk cow in our calculation, when its methane is used in a natural gas truck in place of a diesel truck, is equivalent to taking roughly one car off the road from a NOx perspective. And from a particulate matter perspective, one milk cow, its gas being used in a natural gas truck versus a diesel truck is like taking four cars off the road. So these are very beneficial projects to the air quality in California.
That's a very valid point. So thank you very much for pointing that out, Neil. I think it's an important point of discussion, and it actually makes me think of some other important points that are being raised right now. I can see people trying to raise this online on the webinar platform. I actually have a question for you, Neil, as well. I can see that a lot of different people are asking how you're dealing with this. So you are in your projects, or in CalBio's projects, you're selling RNG for vehicle fuel. So you're working with different dairies in clusters. So you're aggregating them in clusters. So what are some of the challenges that you're facing developing these projects, perhaps specifically at this time, given that you're dealing with multiple dairies at once?
It just takes years of project development. And there's really kind of 5 main components of project development, but I'll just give 2 examples. And one is, you need the right to build projects on other people's land. And so we're laying pipeline connecting the dairies together over many miles. And that might be 10 to up to, say, 40 miles of collection lines that we're laying. And that requires easements through privately owned land and encroachment permits through various agencies. And we need the right to every inch of the line. And we have to record that and secure title insurance. And then similarly, we need long-term leases for digester facilities, as well as the central facilities and the interconnection into the pipeline system. And then the second point would just be we share revenue, and we've developed a model informed by dairy co-ops, because dairies often sell their milk through co-ops. And so all the farmers benefit from participating together, and they're paid for their gas based on their production rates. And also they invest in the projects. And so they're not just owning their digester, but they're investors in the shared infrastructure of that collection line, the upgrading facility, and interconnection. As I mentioned before, investing alongside Chevron so that we're able to have significant resources as well as giving the farmers an investment opportunity in these projects that we're building in partnership with them. But it takes years to put all those pieces in place. Danny, are you there?
Oh, sorry. Apologies. I was on mute. Thank you for pointing that out. Who would have known? I was just saying that I have a very interesting question for all of you, since you're looking at this from a completely different perspective. So it would be good to hear your thoughts. So, in your opinion, what is the best way that RNG, or renewable natural gas, can compete against electric in a sustainability discussion for heavy duty trucks? Would anybody like to start by responding
This is
to
Andy.
this?
Let me toss something out there, which was articulated earlier as well.
Sure.
It's known in the space that electric is the sexy approach to the space, and what's lost in the process, as was mentioned earlier, is when you break down the pollution profile of electric versus renewable natural gas, there's almost no comparison. And I think that is the most important issue that needs to be depicted and articulated to others in the space. The other is infrastructure. Using natural gas and renewable natural gas in the transportation space is far easier to roll out and develop. In California in particular, they have a gasoline problem. There are too many vehicles with gasoline issues as far as pollution controls, and one of the problems in moving everybody to electric is the amount of infrastructure that would need to be built as far as new generation. You can get a handful of that through renewables, but the scale of electricity that would have to be developed for passenger vehicles alone, not even including large over-the-road transportation, would be staggering. And the amount of transmission infrastructure that would have to be built would also be staggering. And so I think that's oftentimes lost in the mix, those two issues, infrastructure as well as pollution profiles.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Andy. Anybody else? Would anybody else like to?
This
Sure.
is Harrison. I would add that, I mean, I think the near-term opportunities and what we can do on a large scale to cut carbon emissions from heavy duty and goods movement, heavy duty trucks, and air quality, improve air quality, especially in some of the worst air quality districts where there is heavy truck traffic, is tremendous. And even in the most optimistic and best scenarios for electric or hydrogen platforms that can serve that space, the heavy duty and goods movement, it's not coming for many years. I mean, even under the most optimistic scenario, right? So, what we need to do now, if we want to address things now, is deploy these ultra low NOx RNG trucks. They're the only thing that is out there today that can provide those benefits at scale today. And so the message that I feel like that resonates the most with a lot of people is that this isn't about making a choice for what the future is going to look like for the next 20 years. This is about what we need to do today, and what we can do right now to help fix the problem. And if the truck and if the hydrogen and electric vehicle platforms become remarkably more efficient and lower cost, and the infrastructure is deployed in some fashion that makes sense, that you can serve those trucks, that's fantastic. I don't think anyone wants to stand in the way of that. But again, there's no even the most optimistic scenario, it's not happening nearly as fast as those ultra low NOx RNG trucks can be deployed. And even if those ultra low NOx RNG trucks are replaced in 10 years by hydrogen vehicles, fine. We will have done an enormous amount of good in the interim. And, you know, maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, the RNG is all going to produce hydrogen or produce power for electric trucks, and that would be fine. But it doesn't change the fact that what we need to do now, and what we can do now, is really the biogas vehicle fuel solution.
Hey, this is Thomas.
Sure.
I think one of the important points to think about is it should not be a us versus them conversation. And I think that we get too caught up in the narrative that it's natural gas versus electricity. And I say that because we have a product that's ready to go right now, as was already articulated. And whether or not natural gas vehicles get on the road in California and the rest of the nation will largely depend upon our ability to be able to convince people that it's a good choice for them to clean up their air, be sustainable, be green, and clean up their fleets. And that is not necessarily a direct attack towards electricity or any other type of vehicle. And I think we have to just stay focused on what our technology and what our fuel can do and can provide. There is going to be more than enough room in this space to for multiple fleets. When you look at some of the larger fleets in California, a lot of them have a diverse mix of fuels in vehicles doing different duty cycles. So the thought process that we are going to allow one vehicle or one type of technology to do every single thing a fleet needs to do is kind of ambitious and may not be based in reality. And I will say that includes natural gas vehicles. There is a role for us to play, I think a large role, especially right now, and we need to articulate that. I mean, I am, for those that don't know, I'm a really big sneakerhead. And so there are lots of players in the sneaker industry. Some of them are big, some of them are small, but each one of them is focused on necessarily not battling their enemy, but doing the best they can for their particular culture and their particular audience. And so we need to focus on our audience and make the case.
That's a very good point. Sorry, go on.
This is Johannes. I completely agree with Thomas, and this will resonate with something he said earlier. And that is, I think we've done a fantastic job from a public policy advocacy standpoint over the past decade, where there continues to remain a vast opportunity for improvement, is education of the general public. And that's candidly where the other renewable energy alternatives have an advantage, in that they coalesced their respective industries 15 years before we did ours, at least from the RNG Coalition's perspective in 2011. And so, you know, if you took an informal survey of your neighborhood, of course, appropriately socially distanced, and asked them what first came to mind when they consider renewable energy, probably 9 out of 10 people are going to first suggest wind or solar. And unless you're my neighbors, you're probably not going to say renewable natural gas. And then if you were to suggest, well, what about renewable natural gas? Probably 9 out of 10 people are first going to ask, what is that? And or otherwise associate that with conventional natural gas. So we have to do a better job of educating the general public about what renewable natural gas is, the environmental benefits that are already being realized through various sustainable applications today, and the tremendous opportunity that still remains ahead of us to continue to capture otherwise fugitive methane emissions and convert that for sustainable applications, be it fuel, be it power, heat, or other advancing technologies. So agree, we have to do a better job there, because an informed electorate will then inform the elected. And that's where we're still playing catch up, candidly. with respect to our public policy advocacy.
Thank you very much for that, Johannes. And indeed, very, very useful. On that note, do you actually believe that there are barriers for a development of a similar California LCFS program, perhaps in other parts of the US, like the East Coast? I know there are plans at the moment, but what are your views on expanding this kind of initiative as much as possible?
Yes, well, we were at the forefront of legislative advocacy, along with others in California, to extend the low carbon fuel standard beyond 2020 to 2030. We were successful in getting SB 32 passed to do that, an effort that literally took into the late hours just before the Sindai and the last day of session, and then translating that experience into other states, including helping to inform the Clean Fuels Program in Oregon, where much of their regulation is literally a copy and paste of California, such that we've had to highlight in a few instances where the word California is actually used, and they failed to replace it with the word Oregon. We've continued to gain some traction in the Pacific Northwest, in Washington State, although we've not succeeded in the last year and a half with LCFS legislation there. We have the governor's strong support. Most recently speaking publicly with me at a ribbon cutting for one of our recent RNG production facilities, and a commitment to see that legislation advance. In 2020, unfortunately, COVID is postponing that, so that will be an effort delayed till 2021. And then in the interim, we've been working on a regional LCFS effort in the Pacific Northwest that has also hit some road bumps. But we've made significant progress in New York State, also working with the Great Plains Institute in the Midwest and in the Minnesota area. So we are confident and committed to realizing similar low carbon fuel standard programs in multiple states. As I said earlier, that's important for our industry to have multiple market alternatives where RNG demand is created and called for, so that all of our proverbial eggs aren't placed in one policy basket. I think that's dangerous for us. And with respect, that applies to transportation fuel application more broadly too. One of the reasons why our partnership with NGV America at the national level and at state levels, like with Thomas Lawson and the California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition, is because their associations and their members are the ones manufacturing natural gas engines and deploying natural gas vehicles, which we need in order to dispense renewable natural gas fuel into. And because our mission and charter is not related to natural gas vehicle deployment, it's a demand source that's outside of our control. And so, again, RNG for transportation fuels focus our webinar today, and has been the principal policy driving industry growth and production since 2015. But we're already looking to other markets beyond transportation fuel, simultaneous to transportation fuel deployment, and including but not limited to decarbonization of the building sector. So looking at LCFS type programs for buildings, where we now have an enormous existing demand, in addition and complementary to the transportation fuel sector.
That's really such a good point, and it leads to my very final point, as we do have to wrap up in the next minutes. But I think most of the audience, and of course myself too, we are all interested in your thoughts on how investors perceive the transition, at this current challenging time. So for companies moving to adopting renewable natural gas and trying to align with sustainability goals, how do investors actually perceive this transition risks, in your opinion, that these companies might face at this point? Is there a financial impact that may be elevated at this point?
Well, our perspective, and certainly I think the others on the panel should help answer this too, as developers, marketers, and joint venture partners on these projects. We're very bullish on the market, and we're proud of the work we've enabled our industry to perform through effective policy advocacy, through protection, expansion, and creation of new markets. When we first started, there were only 30 projects. That was back in 2011. In our first 4 years of existence, we saw that expand to 47 projects, such that in 2015, we set a target to enable the industry to double the number of projects by 2025. Very proud that last July, we exceeded our 2025 goal of 100 projects, 5.5 years ahead of schedule. We now have 113 projects operating, producing renewable natural gas today. And as significant as that is, it's only so compared to past history. We now have a policy platform in place. We now have an advocacy voice that's amplified and it's growing. And when we look at the methane that's still being produced from more than 43,000 organic waste sites across North America, we realize that our work has just begun. And from the other side of the coin, our best days are still ahead of us. So there's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of methane to be mitigated, captured, controlled, recycled, converted. And our industry is poised to help make that happen. In terms of, and so I'll address that in terms of what's the RNG potential. I think we're just now beginning to see the horizon, and it is bright. In terms of the near-term impediments for the investment community, it all points back to market uncertainty. And while we're doing our job as an organization and industry to create as much predictability, the reality is, as long as we have an electorate that's replaced every 2 and 4 years, we're constantly having to re-educate and indoctrinate and highlight the environmental economic benefits of RNG. So that's an endless task. And that's, again, just a part of our a political system. And so it's a political reality that we have to contend with. And I think we're doing as good a job as we can in that regard. And the reality is, public policies are currently underwriting through obligated parties and credits that they're either required to purchase or which can be monetized by our industry, are underwriting a lot of project development today. And that needs to continue. But candidly, I mean, as we're talking about prospective end users increasing adoption of renewable natural gas, the reality is, in addition to the RFS, LCFS type programs, RPS, AEPSs, which have sustained our industry over the last almost 40 years, alphabet companies, including but not limited to the likes of Google, Apple, Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon, and others, could single-handedly, by their own corporate sustainability objectives, underwrite our SMART initiative and essentially fund the development of the 43,000 projects that I referred to that are producing methane from society's organic waste today. So we're again trying to improve our outreach and communication beyond industry to connect with consumers, to educate them and to help them realize the investment prospects, and investment not only from an economic standpoint, but into our future and into the improvement of air quality and ultimately global climate change.
Excellent, Johannes. Thank you very much for those wise words. I think we will probably have to wrap up our webinar at this point in time, unless there are any sort of closing remarks that anybody wants to make while we're still on the platform. Then let me know now. Otherwise, we do have to bring this to an end. I believe the platform records for 60 minutes. So I'd like to, sorry.
Our closing comment, just to, basic, I think Johannes hit the nail right on the head there. But basically, I think the outlook is great for renewable natural gas. The potential to do even more in these next 10 years than we did in the last 10 years is extremely high. But I will say that large portion of that responsibility is in our hands. So we need to take lessons learned. We need to be able to pivot and use new tools and new types of approaches to our industry, but also as we, think about what communities need to hear from us. And I think that that's going to be key for these next 10 years. But we should not allow folks that have chosen one particular technology over another to dictate to us our views on the future. You know, we need to stay focused on what we can do, our positives, our benefits, and I think that will sustain us as we start to pivot in the next few years.
Great. Thank you so much, Thomas, and also everyone else who was involved in this webinar. Thank you especially to our speakers who represent great organizations doing so much for this industry. So once again, BP, AMP Americas, California Bioenergy, the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas, and California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition. So their thought leaders joined us today, and they made this webinar a huge success. So thank you so much for joining. There are people all around the world joining in live, so I hope you've gained even more than what you hope from our amazing speaker lineup. These recordings will be sent by email to all the webinar registrants, and fortunately we've learned that there are things that you could do to overcome the various challenges that are associated with the utilization of renewable natural gas. It's very exciting. The transition is getting more and more exciting, and I'm really happy to hear such optimism in relation to its utilization in the vehicle fuel market. And yes, we'll keep uncovering stories of interest, and we're always open to collaboration for future webinars. And yeah, until then, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you'll have a beautiful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.